Imagine opening your refrigerator right now. The smell hits you first, that sour edge from the milk that turned 3 days early, even though the carton said you had time. You pull out a bag of spinach that looked perfect on Tuesday and is now a dark, slimy mess by Friday. You think about the chicken you bought on sale, the one sitting in the back, and you wonder if it is still safe or if you are about to gamble with your stomach tonight. Maybe you have stood in your kitchen at 11 at night, throwing away food you paid for with money you worked hard to earn, feeling that small private shame of waste that nobody else sees but you. This is a quiet, constant problem in modern life. We have machines built specifically to stop food from rotting, and we still lose track, still get it wrong, still throw away parts of our paycheck wrapped in plastic. But here is something strange. For most of human history, families did not have this problem in the same way, not because they were better at managing food, but because they built their entire lives, their entire daily rhythm, around the fact that food would not last. And the answer to how we went from that world to a world where we expect a machine in our kitchen to simply solve spoilage forever starts with one stubborn young man, a joke at a party, and a ship loaded with frozen pond water heading toward the tropics. His name was Frederick Tudor. He was 23 years old, the son of a wealthy Boston lawyer, living in Massachusetts in the year 1806. He was not a scientist. He was not an inventor in the way we usually imagine one, hunched over blueprints with a vision of changing the world. He was, by most accounts, a restless and somewhat difficult young man who had failed at a few business ventures already and was looking for something that would make him rich and prove something to his family. The story goes that at a gathering with friends and his brother, someone joked about how wonderful it would be to have a cold drink while visiting the sweltering islands of the Caribbean. It was meant as a passing comment, the kind of thing people say and forget 5 minutes later. Frederick did not forget it. He looked at the frozen ponds near his family's estate in Massachusetts, ponds that froze thick and solid every winter and were, in his eyes, completely wasted, just sitting there until spring melted them back into nothing. He thought, what if I could take that ice and sell it somewhere it had never existed before, somewhere people had never even tasted a cold drink in their entire lives? To understand how wild this idea seemed at the time, you have to understand what the world looked like before mechanical cooling existed in any form. Food preservation in the early 1800s was a daily, physical struggle that shaped entire households. Meat had to be salted heavily or smoked over fires for days, which changed its taste completely and made fresh meat a rare luxury, except right after a slaughter. Milk soured within hours in the summer heat, so families who could afford a cow often had to drink it nearly the moment it was collected, or turn it immediately into cheese or butter to keep any value from it at all. Vegetables were eaten according to the season with almost no flexibility. Root vegetables stored in cool cellars dug into the earth, apples wrapped individually in paper and kept in dark barns. But anything delicate like berries or leafy greens had to be eaten within a day, or simply lost. Fish caught far from the coast rotted before they could reach inland markets, which meant entire populations living more than a short wagon ride from water rarely tasted fresh fish at all. Wealthy households built spring houses, small stone buildings constructed directly over a natural cold spring, using the year-round chill of underground water to slow spoilage for a few extra days. Some families dug ice pits lined with straw and filled them with snow packed down in winter, hoping it would last into the warmer months, though it usually melted long before summer ended. In cities, the smell of spoiled food in the gutters during summer was simply part of daily life, an accepted unpleasantness that nobody questioned because nobody had ever known anything different. Doctors at the time did not fully understand the connection between spoiled food and illness in the way we do now, but everyone understood instinctively that summer brought sickness, that certain foods turned dangerous within hours, and that survival meant constant vigilance over what you ate and when. Frederick Tudor's idea, then, was not simply about luxury. It touched something deeper, a fantasy that people in hot climates had probably never even allowed themselves to imagine. The idea of cold on demand, year-round, regardless of season. In 1806, he loaded a ship with ice cut directly from a frozen pond and sent it toward the island of Martinique in the Caribbean. The voyage was a disaster. Most of the ice melted before the ship even arrived, turning into nothing more than puddles of water sloshing in the hold, a financial loss that would have ended most men's ambitions completely. Newspapers mocked him. His own family reportedly thought he had lost his mind, throwing money into the ocean quite literally for an idea that defied common sense. But Tudor was the kind of person who became more stubborn the more he was doubted. He went back to the drawing board, not with new chemistry or new science, because none of that existed yet for this purpose, but with practical, almost obsessive attention to one simple problem. How do you stop ice from melting long enough to survive a long journey? He experimented for years with insulation, eventually discovering that ice packed in sawdust, a cheap byproduct that New England sawmills were practically giving away. Insulated far better than anything else he had tried. He built specially designed ice houses with double walls and air gaps, which dramatically slowed melting compared to simply stacking ice in a barn. He refined the cutting process too, working with an inventor named Nathaniel Wyeth, who created a horse-drawn ice-cutting plow that allowed workers to cut ice into uniform blocks far faster and more efficiently than hand-sawing ever could. What had started as one rich young man's stubborn obsession slowly became an actual functioning industry. By the 1830s, Frederick Tudor, now nicknamed the Ice King by people who once mocked him, was shipping ice not just to the Caribbean, but to the southern United States, and eventually across oceans to places like Calcutta in British-controlled India. A journey of more than 4 months across brutally hot seas, and still managing to deliver ice that had not completely melted. People in India, who had never experienced anything like it, paid enormous sums simply to hold a piece of frozen water in their hands. This is usually the point where people assume the story is just a quirky historical footnote, an oddity about ice. But this is exactly where the first wave begins, and it is much bigger than ice itself. The success of Tudor's ice trade triggered an entire industry around the harvesting of natural ice in New England. By the middle of the 1800s, lakes like Wenham Lake in Massachusetts became internationally famous brand names, with ice cut from their waters shipped and sold as a premium product across the United States and Europe, advertised by name the way we might advertise a specific brand today. Thousands of workers found seasonal employment cutting, storing, and transporting ice every winter, an entire labor economy built around something that, only decades earlier, people would have laughed at as worthless frozen pond water. Railroads expanded specifically to move ice more efficiently from harvesting sites to ports and cities, meaning the ice trade quietly helped shape where certain rail lines were built in the first place. Furniture makers began producing the first wooden ice boxes for home use, insulated cabinets with a compartment at the top for a block of ice and shelves below for food, becoming a status symbol in middle-class homes by the second half of the 1800s. Owning an icebox and having a regular ice delivery man bring fresh blocks to your door several times a week became one of the first markers that a family had entered a new kind of modern domestic life. The second wave moved beyond a single industry into the daily habits of entire populations. Once households had access to regular ice deliveries, eating patterns started shifting in ways that would have been unthinkable to their grandparents. Families could now keep milk fresh for several days instead of hours, dramatically reducing one of the most common sources of illness in young children at the time. City dwellers who had previously eaten almost no fresh meat in summer could now buy it with more confidence, changing butcher shop business models entirely as they invested in their own ice storage to extend how long they could keep cuts of meat presentable and sellable. Brewers, who had always struggled to produce consistent beer in warm months because heat ruined fermentation, began using ice to control temperatures, allowing certain styles of beer to be brewed and sold reliably throughout the entire year instead of being seasonal products. Hospitals started using ice to cool patients with fevers and to preserve certain medicines that had previously spoiled too quickly in summer heat to be reliably stocked. Even something as simple as the idea of a cold drink on a hot day, something people in temperate climates take completely for granted now, spread from being an eccentric luxury enjoyed by the wealthy in port cities to something an increasing number of working-class families could occasionally experience too. As ice became cheaper and more widely available through the later decades of the 1800s. The emotional and cultural shift mattered just as much as the practical one. People began to expect coolness as something achievable, rather than something only nature provided in winter, planting the earliest seeds of a mindset that would eventually demand mechanical refrigeration in every single home. By now, you can probably feel where this story is heading, how something this size keeps expanding into bigger and bigger territory. And honestly, that is exactly why I keep making these videos. Because history is full of these quiet little moments that nobody expected to matter. And if you enjoy seeing how something this small reshaped the entire world, sticking around and subscribing means you will not miss the next one. And it genuinely means a lot to have people who come back episode after episode, because this channel exists for people who, like me, find real comfort and wonder in discovering that the world we live in was built from 1,000 tiny accidents nobody saw coming. So if that is you, you are exactly who this is for, and I would love to have you stay. The third wave pushed into structures far larger than household habits, into economics and politics on a national and even international scale. The natural ice trade that Tudor pioneered eventually became one of the largest export industries in New England, generating fortunes and reshaping trade relationships between the northern United States and tropical regions that had never before had any reason to do business with cold weather states. But the truly massive structural shift came later in the century, when natural ice harvesting began to be replaced by mechanical refrigeration, a technology developed by multiple engineers across different countries through the 1800s, eventually allowing refrigeration to happen anywhere, without depending on a frozen lake somewhere in the north. This breakthrough collided with another industry at exactly the right moment: meat packing. A businessman named Gustavus Swift, working in Chicago in the 1870s, recognized that if he could keep meat cold during long train journeys, he could slaughter cattle near the stockyards of the Midwest and ship the dressed meat itself across the country, instead of shipping live animals long distances, which was expensive, dangerous, and caused the animals to lose weight and quality during transport. He invested heavily in refrigerated rail cars, an idea many people around him initially dismissed as impractical and overly expensive. It worked far better than almost anyone expected, and it completely restructured the American meat industry. Chicago became the center of one of the largest meatpacking economies in the world, attracting waves of immigrants seeking work in the stockyards, reshaping entire neighborhoods, labor movements, and even electoral politics in the city, as the working conditions in these refrigerated meatpacking plants eventually became the subject of national investigations and new food safety laws. The ripple effects reached all the way to Washington, where public outrage over unsafe meatpacking practices, made possible only because refrigeration allowed meat to travel so far from where it was processed, contributed directly to the creation of federal food inspection regulations in the early 1900s, laws that still shape how food safety works in the United States today. The fourth wave is the one that touches almost every single person reading this right now, because it is the one that brought refrigeration directly into the home as an electric, automatic, always running machine rather than something dependent on ice deliveries or natural frozen lakes. Electric refrigerators began appearing in American homes in the 1920s, and within just a few decades, they transformed from a rare luxury owned by a small percentage of wealthy families into an absolute standard appliance found in nearly every household across developed nations. By the middle of the 1900s, the majority of American homes owned an electric refrigerator, a shift that took less time than the natural ice trade had taken to spread across just New England a century earlier. This single appliance rewired domestic life at a scale that is almost difficult to comprehend now, precisely because we have never known anything different. Grocery shopping changed from something done daily or every few days into something that could be done weekly, because perishable food could now survive far longer at home. This shift alone helped make the modern supermarket possible, since stores could stock larger volumes of fresh and frozen goods, and customers could buy in bulk instead of needing constant small purchases. A man named Clarence Birdseye, who had spent time in the Arctic and noticed how fish frozen instantly in extreme cold retained much better texture and taste than fish frozen slowly, developed quick freezing techniques in the 1920s that eventually gave rise to the entire frozen food industry, an industry that today is worth hundreds of billions of dollars worldwide and stocks entire aisles in every single grocery store on the planet. Refrigeration also reshaped where people could live and how cities could grow, because it broke the ancient dependence between population centers and nearby food production. Cities far from fertile farmland or fishing waters could now reliably feed millions of residents using food shipped in from distant regions or even other countries, made possible by refrigerated trucks, ships, and warehouses, forming what we now call the global cold chain. An enormous invisible infrastructure of climate-controlled transportation and storage that quietly keeps food edible as it travels from farms in one hemisphere to dinner plates in another, often crossing thousands of miles and several countries before it ever reaches a kitchen table. And yet, here is the strange twist hidden inside this entire story, the kind of irony that history seems to enjoy producing again and again. The technology that solved the ancient terror of spoiled food, the technology that ended diseases caused by contaminated milk and meat, the technology that let humanity finally defeat the limits that nature had placed on diet and survival for thousands of years, also created brand new problems that previous generations never had to face at all. The chemical refrigerants developed in the 1900s to make refrigeration cheaper and more efficient, particularly a class of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, were eventually discovered in the 1970s and 1980s to be steadily destroying the ozone layer high above the planet, a discovery so alarming that it led to one of the most significant international environmental agreements in modern history, the Montreal Protocol, signed by nearly every nation on Earth specifically to phase out these chemicals before they caused irreversible damage to the atmosphere that protects all life on the planet from harmful solar radiation. The very invention designed to protect food, and by extension protect human health, had quietly been damaging the atmosphere of the entire planet the whole time, without anyone noticing for decades. Even today, modern refrigerants and the enormous, constant electricity demand of running refrigerators and freezers in nearly every home and business on Earth contribute meaningfully to global energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, making refrigeration one of those rare technologies that is simultaneously responsible for saving countless lives from foodborne illness, while also contributing to environmental challenges that future generations will continue dealing with for a long time. And there is one more irony layered on top of all of this. Despite having more advanced food preservation technology available to ordinary households than any generation in human history, modern people in wealthy countries still throw away a staggering amount of food every single year. Food that goes bad sitting inside the very machines built specifically to prevent that from happening, almost as if abundance itself created a different kind of carelessness that scarcity never allowed our ancestors to have. It is strange to think that all of this, the global cold chain, the supermarket aisles stretching endlessly with frozen goods, the international treaty protecting the ozone layer, the entire structure of how modern humanity eats, traces back to one 23-year-old man standing at a party in 1806, listening to a passing joke about how nice it would be to have something cold to drink in a hot place, and deciding, against everyone's advice and despite his very first attempt ending in complete failure, that he could actually make that joke real. Frederick Tudor never set out to change how the entire world eats. He was not trying to invent global food security or international environmental policy or the modern supermarket. He simply looked at a frozen pond in Massachusetts that everyone else considered worthless and saw an opportunity that nobody else could imagine yet. That one stubborn decision, born from a joke and a block of frozen pond water, slowly grew into an idea so large that today it touches almost every meal eaten by nearly every person on the planet. Proof that the smallest, strangest ideas, the ones everyone else dismisses as foolish at first, are sometimes the very ones that end up reshaping the entire world.